The first night at the Iron Ridge Pack gates was the longest of my life, filled with every doubt and fear that had plagued me during the 3-day journey to reach this place. I huddled beneath the ancient oak tree that stood sentinel beside the massive stone pillars, my thin coat providing little protection against the autumn wind that seemed determined to strip away what little courage I had left. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and I was here because of a letter that had arrived 2 weeks ago, written in a child's careful handwriting, that had turned my world upside down and sent me across 3 states to stand outside a werewolf pack's territory like some desperate supplicant, hoping for scraps of mercy. The letter was still in my jacket pocket, the paper worn soft from countless readings. The words burned into my memory with the kind of painful clarity that comes from having your heart broken and mended simultaneously. Dear Miss Sarah, it began, "My name is Tommy and I'm 6 years old, and my daddy says you're my birth mom. I live with the Iron Ridge Pack, and my daddy is Alpha Marcus, but I don't have a mommy, and everyone else does. Daddy said you had to give me away when I was a baby because you were too young, but maybe now you're old enough to be my mommy. I drew you a picture of our house and me. Please come visit if you want to. Love, Tommy." The crayon drawing that had been included was still carefully folded beneath the letter, a stick figure house with a chimney sending up purple smoke. A small boy with yellow hair holding hands with a woman labeled Mommy in shaky letters. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking artwork I had ever seen. 6 years. It had been 6 years since I'd held my newborn son for exactly 3 minutes before the social worker took him away to the family that could provide everything I couldn't. I was 17 then, homeless and alone, with no resources to care for a baby and no support system to help me learn. The adoption had been closed, final, meant to give Tommy the stable life I couldn't provide, while allowing me to rebuild my shattered existence. I'd spent those 6 years finishing high school, working my way through college, and building a career in pediatric nursing that let me care for other people's children while mourning the one I'd lost, and now he wanted me to come back. The pack's territory was impressive even in the darkness, surrounded by walls that spoke of wealth and power accumulated over generations. Through the iron bars of the gate, I could see lights twinkling in windows of buildings that looked more like a small town than a traditional pack compound. It was exactly the kind of place I had hoped my son would grow up when I made the hardest decision of my life. But sitting here in the cold, waiting for dawn, and the chance to request an audience with the alpha who had raised my child, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake in coming. What if Tommy's letter had been sent without his father's knowledge? What if Alpha Marcus saw me as a threat to the family they had built, an unwanted reminder of Tommy's origins that could disrupt his carefully constructed world? The sound of footsteps on gravel made me look up to see a figure approaching the gate from inside the pack territory. Even in the dim light, I could tell it was a man, tall and powerfully built, with the kind of presence that marked natural leaders. When he reached the gate and I caught sight of his face, my breath stopped entirely. This had to be Alpha Marcus Steelheart, and he was nothing like what I had expected from an adoptive father who had taken in a human baby. He was young, probably early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the soul. But it was the expression on his face that truly surprised me. Not anger or suspicion, but something that looked remarkably like relief. "Sarah Whitmore?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying easily through the bars that separated us. "Yes," I replied, struggling to my feet, despite legs that had gone stiff from hours of sitting. "You must be Alpha Marcus. I received a letter from Tommy, and I hope you don't mind that I came. I know this is irregular, and I understand if you'd prefer that I leave without seeing him." "Mind," Marcus repeated, and something in his tone made me look at him more closely. "Sarah, I've been hoping for 6 years that you would someday want to be part of Tommy's life again." The words hit me like lightning, reordering everything I thought I understood about this situation. "You have." Marcus moved closer to the gate, and I could see exhaustion in his features that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. Tommy has been asking about his birth mother since he was old enough to understand that other children had mommies, and he didn't. I've told him everything I could about you, everything the adoption agency was allowed to share, but it wasn't enough. He needs you, Sarah. We both do. I don't understand, I whispered, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be suggesting. Being a single father is harder than I ever imagined, Marcus admitted with honesty that surprised me. Tommy is brilliant, beautiful, everything I could have asked for in a son. But he's missing something I can't provide, no matter how hard I try. He needs a mother's love, and you're the only person who can give him that. Before I could respond, he continued with urgency that suggested he had been planning this conversation for a long time. I know this is complicated. I know there are legal issues and practical concerns that need to be addressed. But if you're willing, if you really want to be part of his life, then I want to discuss how we can make that happen. Are you saying you'd let me see him? I asked, afraid to hope for something that seemed too good to be true. I'm saying I'd like you to come home, Marcus replied simply. Not as a visitor, not as someone with limited access, but as Tommy's mother. As part of our family, the offer hung in the air between us like a bridge spanning 6 years of separation and regret. Part of me wanted to throw myself at that gate and beg him to let me in immediately. But another part, the part that had learned caution through years of disappointment, held me back. I need time to think, I said finally. It's more than I dared to hope for. I need to understand what you're really offering, what the expectations would be. Of course, Marcus agreed, though I caught a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, I want you to know that door is open whenever you're ready to walk through it. As he turned to leave, I called out impulsively, Marcus, thank you for taking care of him. Thank you for loving him when I couldn't. His smile was gentle and somehow sad. Thank you for trusting me with the most precious gift you could give. Tomorrow, if you're still here, I'd like you to meet him properly. I think you'll be amazed by the incredible young man your son has become. As his footsteps faded into the distance, I settled back beneath the oak tree to wait for dawn. The night was still cold, still uncertain, but for the first time in 6 years, I felt something I had thought was lost forever. I felt hope that maybe, just maybe, the family I had given up might still be mine to claim. The second night was easier in some ways, harder in others. Marcus had sent blankets and hot soup after our conversation, along with a message that I was welcome to use the guest quarters just inside the gate if I preferred. But something kept me rooted to my spot beneath the oak tree, as if leaving that vigil would somehow break the fragile hope that had been building in my chest. I wasn't alone this time, though. Word had spread through the pack about the human woman waiting at their gates, and throughout the evening, curious pack members had come to catch glimpses of Tommy's birth mother. Most maintained respectful distances, but a few had approached to offer quiet words of encouragement. Tommy's a special boy, said an elderly woman who introduced herself as Elder Margaret Moonweaver. Bright as a penny and twice as charming. Alpha Marcus has done well by him, but even we can see something's been missing. What kind of something? I asked, grateful for any insight into my son's life. The gentleness that only comes from a mother's touch, she replied with the wisdom of someone who had raised children of her own. Marcus loves that boy with everything he has. But there's a tenderness in Tommy that needs nurturing from someone who understands it. As dawn broke on my second day, I was startled by the sound of children's laughter coming from the direction of the pack's central buildings. Through the gate's iron bars, I could see a group of youngsters playing in what appeared to be a school courtyard, their voices carrying on the morning breeze with the kind of carefree joy that made my heart ache with longing. And there, unmistakable even at a distance, was a small boy with sun-bright hair who moved with energy that seemed to light up everything around him. Even from 50 yards away, I could see that he had my eyes, my stubborn chin, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something, my son. My baby, who wasn't a baby anymore, but a vibrant 6-year-old, with a personality that shone like a beacon. That's him, isn't it? Came a voice beside me, and I turned to see Marcus approaching with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that mixed pride with something that might have been nervousness. "Yes," I whispered, unable to take my eyes off Tommy as he chased his friends in some elaborate game that involved a lot of running and shrieking with delight. "He's perfect, Marcus. He's absolutely perfect. He gets that from you," Marcus said quietly, settling beside me on the ground with casual grace that spoke of someone comfortable in any environment. The joy, the curiosity, the way he sees wonder in everything around him. Those are gifts you gave him. I accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth to steady hands that had begun trembling with emotion. "How much does he know about me?" "About why I gave him up? Everything that's age-appropriate," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "He knows you were very young when he was born, that you wanted him to have the best life possible, and that giving him up was the hardest thing you'd ever done. He knows you loved him enough to make sure he was safe and cared for, and he's not angry. He doesn't resent me for abandoning him." Marcus turned to look at me with expressions that held gentle correction. "Sarah, Tommy doesn't see what you did as abandonment. He sees it as the ultimate act of love. I've made sure he understands that you chose his welfare over your own happiness, and that kind of sacrifice is something to honor, not resent." The words brought tears to my eyes, relief flooding through me at the realization that my son had been raised without bitterness or feelings of rejection. "Thank you for that. I was so afraid he would hate me." "Impossible," Marcus said with conviction that brooked no argument. "That boy has been dreaming about meeting his birth mother since he learned to talk. You're not a source of shame in his life, Sarah. You're the missing piece he's been waiting for, as if summoned by our conversation." Tommy broke away from his playmates and began running toward the gate with the kind of purpose that suggested he had spotted something interesting. As he drew closer, I could see the resemblance more clearly, could identify features that were unmistakably mine, mixed with others that must have come from his biological father. But it was when he reached the gate and looked directly at me that my world stopped entirely. Those were my eyes looking back at me, filled with curiosity and intelligence, and something that looked remarkably like recognition. "Daddy," Tommy said, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation of a child who was trying very hard to be grown up. "Is that my birth, Mommy?" "Yes, son," Marcus replied gently. "This is Sarah, the lady who wrote back after you sent your letter." Tommy studied me with the intense focus that children bring to things that matter to them, his small hands gripping the iron bars as he pressed his face closer to get a better look. "You're prettier than I imagined," he said finally. And his words carried such innocent sincerity that I had to bite my lip to keep from sobbing. "Thank you." "Sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice rough with emotions I was struggling to control. "You're much more handsome than your picture showed, and taller than I expected. I grew 2 whole inches this year," Tommy announced with pride that made both Marcus and me smile. Daddy measured me on my bedroom wall. "Do you want to see?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that went far beyond simple curiosity. This was my son asking if I wanted to see his room, his life, the world he had built during the 6 years I had been absent. "I would love to see," I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "Can she come in, Daddy?" Tommy asked, turning to Marcus with hope that was almost painful to witness. "Can she have lunch with us and see my room and meet my friends?" Marcus looked at me with questions in his eyes, silently asking if I was ready for this next step. The truth was, I didn't think I'd ever be ready. 6 years of separation couldn't be bridged with a single conversation, and there were practical concerns that needed to be addressed before I could truly be part of Tommy's life. But looking at my son's eager face, seeing the trust and acceptance he was offering without reservation, I knew there was only one answer I could give. "If your daddy says it's okay," I said carefully, not wanting to undermine Marcus's authority, "I would love to have lunch with you and see your room." "It's more than okay," Marcus said, rising to unlock the gate with movements that seemed to carry symbolic weight far beyond their practical purpose. "Welcome to Iron Ridge Pack territory, Sarah. Welcome home." As the gate swung open and Tommy launched himself into my arms with the kind of wholehearted enthusiasm that only children possessed, I felt 6 years of grief and regret beginning to heal. His small body was warm and solid against mine, real in ways that dreams and memories could never be. "I missed you so much," I whispered into his hair, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I missed you too," Tommy replied with simple acceptance that took my breath away. "But you're here now, and that's what matters." Over lunch in the Pack's communal dining hall, I was amazed by the community that had raised my son. Children and adults alike welcomed me with warmth that spoke of Marcus's influence, treating me not as an outsider or threat, but as someone whose presence completed something that had been incomplete. "Tommy talks about you all the time," said one of his teachers, a kind woman named Eleanor Brightwater. "He's written dozens of stories about adventures he wants to have with his birth mommy when she comes to visit." "Stories?" I asked, looking at Tommy with surprise and delight. "I'm a very good writer," Tommy announced, with the confidence of a child who had been consistently encouraged. "I wrote one about us going to the zoo, and one about teaching you to swim, and one about baking cookies together." Each story he described sent warmth spreading through my chest, evidence that he had been thinking about me, planning for our reunion, believing it would happen even when I had given up hope. "Would you like to read them?" he asked eagerly. "They're in my room with all my other important stuff." "I would love to read every single one," I replied truthfully. Tommy's room was everything a 6-year-old boy could want, filled with books and toys and artwork that spoke of a childhood rich with love and opportunity. But it was the small shrine on his bedside table that made me cry, a framed copy of the only photo I had ever been allowed to take of him as a newborn, surrounded by the letters I had written but never sent, somehow obtained and treasured by the son who had never stopped hoping I would return. "I knew you'd come back," Tommy said matter-of-factly as he showed me his story collection. "Daddy said you might not be ready yet, but I knew you would be eventually." "How did you know?" I asked, settling on his bed as he climbed up beside me with the casual intimacy of a child who had already decided I belonged in his life. "Because you're my mommy," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "And mommies always come back to their babies when they can." As afternoon faded into evening, and Marcus began hinting that perhaps it was time for me to return to my vigil beneath the oak tree, Tommy made an announcement that changed everything. "She can't leave tonight, Daddy," he said, with the kind of authority that children sometimes wielded when discussing matters of great importance. "She's been sleeping outside for 2 nights, and that's not safe. Mummies need to sleep in safe places." "Tommy," Marcus began gently, "Sarah might have her own plans about where she wants to stay." "Do you have plans?" Tommy asked me directly, his eyes wide with concern that was heartbreakingly mature for his age. The truth was, I had nowhere to go except back to my spot beneath the tree. I had used most of my savings to make this trip, and my return flight wasn't for another week. I had been planning to spend those days at the gate, hoping for brief glimpses of my son, never imagining I would be welcomed into his daily life. "I don't have anywhere else to go," I admitted quietly. "Then you'll stay here," Marcus said with finality that surprised me. "We have guest rooms, and Tommy's right about safety being important." "But I don't want her in a guest room," Tommy protested. "I want her in my room. We have lots of talking to catch up on." The suggestion was so innocent, so perfectly reasonable from a child's perspective, that I found myself looking to Marcus for guidance on how to handle this delicate situation. "Would that be okay with you?" Marcus asked me. "Tommy has a daybed in his room where he sometimes reads. You could sleep there if you're comfortable with the arrangement." "Please," Tommy added, his voice carrying hope that was impossible to resist. "I have so many things to show you, and I don't want to wait until tomorrow." Looking at my son's eager face, feeling the warmth of acceptance from the pack that had raised him, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "If you're sure you don't mind the company," I said to Tommy, "I would love to stay in your room tonight." The smile that spread across his face was brilliant enough to light the entire pack territory. And as he began chattering excitedly about all the things we could talk about and all the stories he wanted to share, I felt my heart finally beginning to heal from 6 years of separation. The vigil beneath the oak tree was over. The real journey was just beginning. Don't miss the incredible conclusion to this heartwarming reunion. Will Sarah find her permanent place in Tommy's life? How will their bond grow stronger with each passing day? Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to witness the beautiful finale, where a mother's love finally comes home and a family broken by circumstance is healed by hope. The most touching moments are still ahead. 6 months had passed since that first night beneath the oak tree, and I was still sometimes amazed by how completely my life had transformed. The guest room in Marcus's house had become my permanent residence. The Iron Ridge Pack had become my community, and most incredibly, Tommy had become my son again, in every way that mattered. This morning found me in the Pack's medical center, using my nursing skills to help Dr. Helena Brightwater with the community health initiatives that had become my passion project. Working with children who needed medical care had allowed me to contribute something meaningful to the Pack while staying close to Tommy's daily routine. The Morrison boys' fever broke overnight, Helena reported as we reviewed the charts from our young patients. His mother said, "Having someone with your gentleness available during the crisis made all the difference in keeping her calm." "I'm just glad we could help," I replied, though the praise still felt strange after so many years of believing my maternal instincts were inadequate rather than valuable. The truth was, everything about pack life had surprised me. I had expected to feel like an outsider, a human intruding on supernatural society. Instead, I had found acceptance that went beyond tolerance to genuine embrace. The wolves of Iron Ridge had welcomed me, not despite being human, but because they recognized something in me that transcended species, a mother's love for her child. "Sarah," came an excited voice from the medical center's entrance, and I turned to see Tommy bursting through the doors with the kind of enthusiasm that marked all his arrivals. "Guess what happened at school today?" "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked, crouching down to his level as he launched into the detailed recounting that had become one of my favorite parts of each day. "Mrs. Patterson asked us to draw pictures of our families for the art show next week," Tommy announced, pulling a folded paper from his backpack with obvious pride. "And I drew you and Daddy and me." The artwork he showed me was far more sophisticated than his earlier crayon drawings, clearly the work of a child whose motor skills and artistic vision had developed significantly over the past months. It showed 3 figures holding hands in front of a house that was unmistakably the Iron Ridge Pack Hall, all of them smiling with the kind of joy that radiated from the paper. But it was the way he had labeled us that made my heart swell with emotions too complex for words. My family written in careful letters across the top, with Mommy, Daddy, and me written beneath each figure. "It's beautiful." "Tommy," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being, "I love how you drew us all together." "That's because we are all together now," he said, with the matter-of-fact certainty that children brought to truth that adults sometimes struggled to accept. "You came back just like I knew you would." As we walked home together, Tommy chattering about his day and the various adventures he had planned for the weekend, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of perfect normalcy. The transition hadn't always been smooth, despite the warm welcome from the pack. There had been nights when Tommy woke up crying, afraid that morning would reveal my disappearance had been just another dream. There had been moments when I doubted my ability to be the mother he needed after 6 years of absence. Most challenging of all, there had been the complex dance of learning to co-parent with Marcus, navigating the boundaries between his role as Tommy's adoptive father and my role as his birth mother. But Marcus had been patient, generous, and most importantly, willing to share rather than compete for Tommy's affections. He had understood from the beginning that love multiplied rather than divided. That Tommy having two parents who adored him was a blessing rather than a complication. "Sarah," Marcus said as we entered the house, his voice carrying the warmth that had become familiar over the months of learning to be a family together. "How was your day at the medical center?" "Productive," I replied, settling onto the couch as Tommy immediately climbed into my lap with the casual affection that never failed to amaze me. "Dr. Brightwater says the community health program is exceeding all expectations." "Of course it is," Marcus said with pride that made my cheeks warm. "You brought something to our medical services that we didn't even know we were missing. Over dinner, as we discussed Tommy's school projects and weekend plans, with the easy conversation of a family comfortable with routine, I found myself marveling at how natural this felt. 6 months ago, I had been a stranger looking through the gates at a life I thought I could never be part of. Now I was an integral part of that life, valued not just for my connection to Tommy, but for my own contributions to the community. "Mommy," Tommy said suddenly, his voice carrying the serious tone he used when discussing matters of great importance, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything. Are you going to stay forever now? Or will you have to leave again someday?" The question hit me like a physical blow, reminding me that despite the stability we had built, Tommy still carried the fear of abandonment that came from losing his mother once before. I looked across the table at Marcus, whose expression showed he understood the weight of this moment. "Tommy," I said carefully, choosing my words with the precision that important conversations demanded, "I will never leave you again unless you ask me to. You are my son, this is my home, and this family is exactly where I belong. Do you promise?" he asked, his young eyes holding mine with intensity that spoke of a child who had learned that promises weren't always kept. "I promise," I said firmly. "Cross my heart and hope to fly." "Hope to fly?" Tommy giggled, the tension breaking as he recognized our silly variation on the traditional oath. "Hope to fly," I confirmed, "because that's what happens when you're as happy as I am right now." Later that evening, as I tucked Tommy into bed with the ritual that had become sacred to both of us, he surprised me with an announcement that changed everything I thought I understood about our situation. "Mommy," he said sleepily, "I told Mrs. Patterson that you're not my birth mommy anymore." My heart clenched with sudden fear that he was rejecting the connection we had rebuilt. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean you're just my mommy now," he explained with the logic that only children possessed. "The birth part was a long time ago when I was a baby. Now you're just my regular mommy, who takes care of me and loves me and reads me stories." The words sent relief and joy flooding through me in equal measure. "And that's enough for you? Just being your regular mommy?" "It's everything," Tommy said simply, then added with drowsy honesty, "I used to be sad that other kids had mommies, and I only had Daddy, but now I have both, and that makes me the luckiest kid in the whole pack." As I kissed his forehead and turned off the lights, I found Marcus waiting for me in the hallway, his expression showing he had overheard Tommy's declaration. "How are you feeling about that?" he asked quietly, as we made our way to the living room where we had developed the habit of sharing evening conversations. "Grateful," I replied honestly. "Overwhelmed by how generous you've been in sharing him with me. Amazed that something I thought I'd lost forever turned out to be waiting for me to be ready to claim it." Marcus settled into his favorite armchair while I curled up on the couch. The comfortable distance we maintained, speaking of respect and growing friendship rather than romantic tension. Over the months, we had developed a partnership that prioritized Tommy's well-being above all else, and that foundation had allowed trust to grow between us. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice carrying the careful tone he used when discussing important matters, "there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about, something that might change our arrangement. my stomach clenched with sudden fear that he was about to ask me to leave, that I had somehow overstepped boundaries I didn't understand. What kind of something? The Pack Council has been discussing your status here, he continued, and I felt my worst fears beginning to materialize. As a human living in supernatural territory, there are legal complications that we need to address formally. Are they asking me to leave? I whispered, the words barely audible through the terror that had closed my throat. Quite the opposite, Marcus said with a smile that transformed his serious expression. They're asking if you'd be willing to accept full membership in the Iron Ridge Pack, with all the rights and protections that status entails. The offer hit me like lightning, so unexpected and wonderful that I could barely process its implications. Full membership? But I'm human. You're Tommy's mother, Marcus corrected gently. You're someone who has contributed meaningfully to our community's well-being. Your family, Sarah, in every way that matters to us. What would that mean, practically speaking? It would mean you could never be forced to leave, that you would have voting rights in Pack decisions, that you would be entitled to the protection and support of every Pack member, Marcus explained. Most importantly, it would formalize what's already true, that this is your home. Tears began streaming down my cheeks as the magnitude of what he was offering sank in. And Tommy? How would he feel about this? Why don't you ask him yourself? Marcus suggested with amusement, and I turned to see Tommy peeking around the corner in his pajamas, obviously having snuck out of bed to eavesdrop on our conversation. Were you listening to grown-up talk, young man? I asked with mock sternness that fooled no one. Maybe a little, Tommy admitted with the sheepish grin that always made him impossible to scold. But I heard the important part. They want to make you an official Pack member, so you can't ever leave. And how do you feel about that? I asked, needing to hear his opinion directly. I feel like it's about time, Tommy declared with satisfaction that was unmistakable. I told everyone at school that you were going to be my forever mommy. And now it will be really, really true, as I held my son and contemplated the incredible gift I was being offered. I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. 3 nights of waiting at the Pack gates had led to 6 months of rebuilding connections I thought I'd lost forever. The desperate vigil of a broken-hearted mother had transformed into the foundation of a family stronger than anything I had dared to imagine. Yes, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Yes, I accept full membership in the Iron Ridge Pack. I accept this home, this family, this life that somehow found its way back to me when I finally found the courage to reach for it. The celebration that followed involved the entire Pack, an impromptu gathering where Tommy proudly announced to anyone who would listen that his mommy was now officially part of their community forever. As Pack members offered congratulations and shared stories of their own families, I felt the last pieces of my broken heart finally clicking back into place. The woman who had waited 3 nights at the Pack gates had discovered that some vigils, and not with answers, but with questions. Not, will I be allowed to see my son? But how will we build the life we never thought we could have? And the little boy who had whispered, that's our mommy, had been absolutely right. I wasn't just visiting or helping or temporarily filling a role. I was home, finally and forever, with the family that had been waiting for me to be brave enough to claim it. The oak tree still stood beside the Pack gates, a silent witness to the miracle that had transformed desperation into joy. But I no longer needed its shelter. I had found something better, a place where being Tommy's mother wasn't a privilege to be earned, but a gift to be celebrated, where love had proven stronger than time and fear and all the reasons why reunions weren't supposed to work. Our family had been broken by circumstances beyond our control, but it had been healed by the courage to hope and the wisdom to understand that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for, even when the wait feels impossible to endure. Thank you for joining Sarah and Tommy on this incredible journey of love, loss, and miraculous reunion. If this tale of a mother's unwavering devotion and a child's faith in impossible dreams touched your heart, Please subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories that prove family bonds can survive any separation. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to come home to the people who love you unconditionally. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell to never miss our latest tales of supernatural families, second chances, and the extraordinary magic that happens when someone finally says the words we've been waiting our whole lives to hear.